The heresy of the other Vatican II anti-popes. All of the other Vatican II anti-popes have supported Vatican II's teachings and or even, committed acts of public heresy so atrocious that they should turn the stomach of anyone who dares to call himself a Catholic. Like, if you dare allow the statement to leave your mouth that you are a Catholic, you should be puking watching the garbage these people have done. Your stomach should be turning watching the filth these people have conducted, claiming to be the Pope of the Catholic Church. You should be absolutely disgusted by all of these individuals. And John Paul II, for example, this man literally sat at a pagan ceremony and drank from the cup of devils. And didn't St. Paul literally say, I would not have you be partaker of the drinking from the cups of devils? In fact, let me find that exact quote right now. Give me 1 second. Okay, I have the quote here. This is from First Epistle of St. Paul to the Corinthians, chapter 10. And I'm going to start at, let's say, verse 18. Behold, Israel according to the flesh. Are not they that eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? What then? Do I say that what is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? Or that the idol is anything? But the things which the heathens sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And they would not that you should be made partakers with devils. And I want to briefly say as well, when I was growing up as kind of like, in a heretical environment, let's say, okay, I never once in my entire life heard anyone mention the fact that pagan so-called gods and stuff like that are actually demons. No one. I never heard anyone say that. And it's so obvious from the Bible. Even in the Old Testament, I think it's one of the Psalms says, for the gods of the Gentiles are devils, but the Lord made the heavens, right? That's in the Bible. The so-called gods of the pagans and stuff are demons. They're not these imaginary, a lot of Protestants act as if these beings are just completely imaginary. They don't even exist. No, of course, the way they're portrayed is false. It's not like there's not some god of the wind and god of the harvest and all this kind of nonsense. But there are actual supernatural beings called demons, which are fallen angels that genuinely do deceive these people and perform false miracles and that kind of stuff to induce these pagans to worship them. There really are these evil entities deceiving these people into thinking that they're gods. That is legit. They're not imaginary beings. They do exist, okay? But a lot of Protestants seem to not understand that. And it just makes no sense to me. In fact, a lot of Protestants are so faithless, even by Protestant standards, that they don't even think demons are real. They think demons are like metaphorical. They say, he's dealing with his demons and all that kind of stuff. Is like, demons are real beings, dude. They're actual creatures, actual intellectual, spiritual beings. They're not just metaphors. What do you think Jesus was casting out of people? Casting metaphors out of people? Jesus was not casting imaginary creatures out of people. Jesus casted actual devils out of people. They're real beings, okay? They just don't have physical bodies like we do. They're real beings, just like angels are real beings. God is a real being. But of course, God is not walking around looking like us, right? God is omnipresent, right? We can't see God with our physical eyes, But God is a real being. And so are demons, angels, etc. Okay. Demons are not metaphorical. But continuing here. But the things which the heathen sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that you should be made partakers with devils. You cannot drink the chalice of the Lord and the chalice of devils. You cannot be partakers of the table of the Lord and of the table of devils. So St. Paul literally says here, you cannot drink the chalice of the Lord and the chalice of devils, right? And this guy, Antipope John Paul II, literally, very literally, physically drank from a chalice of devils, a pagan, some kind of pagan ceremonial cup. He literally drank from it. You can't get any more blasphemous than that. You're literally drinking from the devil's cup, like openly, publicly, physically. And of course, there's some exaggeration when I say you can't get any more blasphemous than that. Of course, you can do more blasphemous things, but you get what I'm saying. Just some hyperbole there. So, yeah, anyone who calls himself a Catholic should be completely disgusted with all these individuals, all right? The heresy of Antipope John Paul I. Antipope John Paul I died very quickly after assuming his anti-papacy, but he chose the name John Paul in honor of John the 23rd and Paul VI, clearly showing he agreed with their doctrine and was a heretic just like they were. Allegedly, he was assassinated because he wanted to crack down on money laundering in the Vatican Bank. That is what I've heard. Of course, it is like, I guess, kind of, not certain that that's why he was assassinated, but that's the most common reason I've heard of. And I've also heard that he was a feminist or something like that. So that would also add to his, of course, heresy, because feminism is complete blasphemy and heresy. The heresy of Antipope John Paul II. Antipope John Paul II was probably, at his time, the most bold and disgusting heretic to be born from Vatican II, as he went so far as to pray publicly with heretics and pagans at the quote-unquote Assisi World Day of Prayer in 1986. He literally had a big gathering, a world gathering of pagans and heretics all praying together. Now, I don't know how much more blasphemous than that you can get. That's kind of like, that's pretty much the height of blasphemy. The only thing more blasphemous would probably be like outwardly saying bad things about Jesus. You know what I mean? That would probably be the only way to be like more blasphemous than this, to actually like clearly say horrible things about God and the saints and the Virgin Mary, that kind of stuff. That would probably be the only way to like reach a higher level of blasphemy than this. This is pretty high level of blasphemy here. Catholics are forbidden to participate in the religious activities of heretics and pagans. Anyone who's not Catholic, you are forbidden as a Catholic to participate in the religious activities of non-Catholics. Now, there are certain situations, like say if you go to a funeral just to pay your respects to somebody or something like that. In those kinds of situations, according to theology books that I've seen, it can be permissible for you to say attend somebody's funeral just to pay respects, that kind of stuff. But there, of course, would still be the potential spiritual danger for you, and you must ensure that your participation or your attendance at that event or whatever is not an occasion of scandal, right? So I'd recommend looking at Father Dominic Prummer's Handbook of Moral Theology. He covers that. I think there's also a theology book by McHugh and Callahan that may address that as well, and those kinds of things, okay? This is from the 1917 Code of Canon Law, promulgated by the Apostolic Authority of Pope Benedict XV, binding the Universal Church in perpetuity. It says, "It is not licit for the faithful by any manner to assist actively or to have a part in the sacred rites of non-Catholics." Okay? Psalm 95:5, which I just mentioned earlier. "The false so-called gods that pagans worship are demons. For all the gods of the Gentiles, pagans, are devils, but the Lord made the heavens." And of course, I just read 1 Corinthians 10:20-21 for you, but here, let's read it again. "But the things which the heathens, pagans, sacrifice, They sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that you should be made partakers with devils. You cannot drink the chalice of the Lord and the chalice of devils. You cannot be partakers of the table of the Lord and of the table of devils. The Apostle St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 10, 20 to 21. This is Pope Leo XIII, ad extremis, 1893 AD. The Orient, or the East, right, courageously and successfully explored by the Portuguese, is coveted by many today for its lucrative trade. We, however, have a more noble purpose in mind. We reflect upon those immense regions of the Indies where for many centuries men of the gospel have expended their labor. Our thoughts turn first of all to the blessed apostle Thomas, who is rightly called the founder of preaching the gospel to the Hindus. Then there is Francis Xavier, who long afterwards dedicated himself zealously to the same praiseworthy calling. Through his extraordinary perseverance, he converted hundreds of thousands of Hindus from the myths and vile superstitions of the Brahmins to the true religion. Myths and vile superstitions. They're not these, wonderful teachings to learn from and all kind of garbage that Novus Ordo says, right? They're myths and vile superstitions. Continuing. In the footsteps of this holy man followed numerous priests, secular and religious, who with the authority and permission of the Holy See strove untiringly to preserve and promote the Christian mysteries and institutions introduced by Thomas and renewed by Xavier. To this day, they are continuing these noble efforts. Nevertheless, in the vast reaches of the earth, many are still deprived of the truth, miserably imprisoned in the darkness of superstition. How very great a field, especially in the north, lies yet uncultivated to receive the seed of the gospel. Okay? These pagans need to be rescued, saved from the darkness of their paganism. Because if they die as pagans, they will lose their souls for all eternity. Of course, you don't believe that if you're an indifferentist like Donald Sanborn, who thinks that pagans can be in the state of grace and in the church and all this kind of foolishness. Okay? Marcel Lefebvre taught the same garbage. No, they need to be converted. They need the Catholic faith. Without it, they will lose their souls for all eternity.